The rain had been falling over Ashcroft Manor since before dawn, a soft, insistent whisper that blurred the edges of the world and muffled every sound beyond the iron gates. By the time the maid's scream cut through the house, the storm had settled into a steady rhythm, as though it meant to stay and observe. Sir Reginald Harrington was found dead in his study at precisely 7 minutes past 8. The clock on the mantel had stopped at that moment, its glass face cracked from the inside. The room itself was locked, bolted from within, the key still resting on the polished oak desk. No windows were open, no weapon was visible. There were no signs of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no blood. Sir Reginald lay peacefully in his leather chair, his hands folded in his lap, his face composed in an expression almost of satisfaction. The local police arrived within the hour, damp coats steaming faintly as they crowded into the narrow corridor outside the study. Inspector James Rowley, a man who preferred clear answers and disliked anything that suggested cleverness, surveyed the scene with growing irritation. Locked rooms were never what they seemed. Somewhere, he was certain, there would be a hidden passage, a trick latch, a servant who had forgotten to mention something obvious. Yet Ashcroft Manor yielded nothing. The walls were solid. The door showed no tampering. The key fit no other lock in the house. Sir Reginald's doctor, summoned at once, pronounced the cause of death to be heart failure, sudden, painless, and, on the surface, entirely natural. An old man with a weak heart, Rowley said at last, snapping his notebook shut. Died quietly at his desk. Nothing criminal here. It was then that the housekeeper, Mrs. Dale, cleared her throat with visible reluctance. She had worked at Ashcroft for over 30 years, and had seen too many things to accept simple answers so readily. "There's the match, sir," she said. Rowley turned back, irritation flickering. "What match?" She stepped into the study, careful not to disturb anything, and pointed to the fireplace. Inside, resting on the cold grate, lay a single burned matchstick. It was placed carefully, almost deliberately, parallel to the iron bars. "That fireplace hasn't been used in months," Mrs. Dale said. Sir Reginald hated the smell. "And there were no matches kept in this room." Rowley frowned. A match was nothing. Anyone could have dropped it earlier, or it might have fallen from a pocket long ago. Still, it nagged at him. Why burn a single match and leave it there? Why not throw it away? The inspector dismissed the servants one by one. Sir Reginald had lived alone in the manor, his wife long dead, his only daughter estranged and living abroad. The staff were few: Mrs. Dale, the maid Lucy Finch, and a young footman named Arthur Bell. All claimed they had not entered the study that morning. All seemed suitably shocked. By midday, the rain eased, and Rowley prepared to close the case. The death certificate would read natural causes. Ashcroft Manor would return to its quiet routines. The matchstick would be catalogued, then forgotten. It was only later, as the house settled into an uneasy stillness, that a visitor arrived unannounced. Hercule Poirot stood in the doorway of the study, his immaculate moustache twitching as he took in the scene. He did not touch anything. He did not sit. His eyes moved slowly, thoughtfully, from the chair to the desk, from the cracked clock face to the fireplace. "Mon ami," he murmured to Rowley, who had returned reluctantly at the request of Sir Reginald's solicitor. "You say this case is solved?" Rowley shrugged. "Nothing points to murder." Poirot smiled faintly. "Nothing shouts no, but some things whisper." He stepped closer to the mantel clock. "Observe. The clock stopped at the moment of death. Not unusual, you think? But why is the glass cracked outward, not inward? A small thing, yes, but precise." His gaze drifted to the matchstick. He crouched slightly, his expression sharpening. One match burned completely. To light what? Not the fire. And yet, to strike a match is to produce heat and light, and, how do you say, distraction. Rowley folded his arms. "You think someone locked themselves in here, scared the man to death and vanished?" Poirot straightened. "I think, Inspector, that Sir Reginald Harrington did not die of surprise, nor of age. He died because someone wished it so, and wished it to appear very simple." He looked once more around the silent room, then nodded, as though greeting an old adversary. "This case," he said quietly, "is only pretending to be finished." Poirot did not announce an investigation. He never did. Instead, he asked politely if he might remain at Ashcroft Manor for the afternoon, explaining that damp weather unsettled his nerves and that he would be most grateful for a pot of tea. Inspector Rowley, though unconvinced, agreed out of courtesy and perhaps curiosity. Something in Poirot's calm certainty irritated him, yet he could not quite dismiss it. While the inspector reviewed his notes in the dining room, Poirot wandered the ground floor at a deliberate pace, his eyes absorbing everything. He paused by the hat stand in the entrance hall, straightening a slightly crooked walking cane that did not belong to any of the servants. He glanced at the umbrella rack. 3 umbrellas, all dry despite the morning's rain. A faint crease appeared between his brows. In the kitchen, Mrs. Dale poured tea with hands that trembled just a little too much for a woman accustomed to. Tragedy. Poirot thanked her warmly and asked as though idly how Sir Reginald had been in recent days. "Quiet, sir," she replied. "Very quiet. He kept to himself. Said he was working on his accounts." "And yet," Poirot said gently, "he rang for no one this morning. No tea, no breakfast?" Mrs. Dale hesitated. "No, sir, that was unusual." Poirot nodded, filing the detail away. Unusual habits were often more revealing than dramatic events. He asked next to see the maid, Lucy Finch. She entered the study nervously, eyes darting toward the chair where Sir Reginald had died. Poirot spoke kindly, almost conversationally, asking her about her morning routine. She recited it carefully, too carefully. When he asked whether she had passed the study before 8 o'clock, she shook her head at once. "No, sir. I went straight from the pantry to the stairs." Poirot smiled, as if satisfied, then reached suddenly into his pocket and produced a small matchbox. Lucy flinched, her fingers tightening around her apron. "Do you smoke, mademoiselle?" Poirot asked. "No, sir," she said quickly. "And matches, do you ever use them?" "Only for the kitchen stove. Never upstairs." Poirot thanked her and dismissed her, watching until the door closed softly behind her. He returned to the fireplace and examined the matchstick again, not touching it, only observing its length, the way it had burned evenly to the end. Later, he spoke with Arthur Bell, the footman, a young man eager to be helpful. Arthur admitted that he had polished the study door the night before and had noticed nothing amiss. Poirot asked whether Arthur owned a lighter or matches. "Yes, sir," Arthur said readily. "I keep them in my coat. For the pipes, you know." "And this morning?" Poirot asked. Arthur shrugged. "Didn't need them." Poirot thanked him as well, but his expression remained thoughtful. As afternoon light faded, Poirot returned to the study with Inspector Rowley. The room had an air of expectation now, as though it knew it was being judged. Poirot stood by the desk, noting the neat stacks of papers, the untouched pen, the absence of any farewell note. "Tell me, Inspector," he said, "did Sir Reginald wear spectacles?" "Yes," Rowley replied. "For reading. And where are they?" Rowley looked again, frowning. The desk drawers were opened, the shelves checked. No spectacles lay anywhere in the room. Poirot gestured to the clock. "And this, wound recently, I think. Someone touched it this morning." Rowley sighed. "Or it stopped when the man died. Perhaps," Poirot said mildly. "But consider, a man sits calmly, his heart fails without warning. Why then does the clock glass break? Why is a match burned here? Why does no one smell smoke?" He walked to the door and examined the lock. This door was locked after the match was struck, not before. Rowley stiffened. "That's impossible." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Impossible is only a word we use when we do not yet see how—" He turned back to the room, lowering his voice. "Someone entered this study briefly. They needed only moments. They lit a match, not to burn, but to heat, to warm something very small, something that would leave no trace once its work was done." Rowley stared at him. "You're suggesting murder by, what, air? Heat?" Poirot smiled thinly. "I am suggesting, mon ami, that someone here knows much more about this death than they pretend, and that one of them, when they saw that little match in the grate, was very much afraid. From somewhere in the house came the soft creak of a floorboard." Poirot listened, his head tilting slightly, as if the manner itself had just answered him. "The case," he said quietly, "has begun to open its eyes." The evening settled heavily over Ashcroft Manor, the corridors dimming as lamps were lit one by one. Poe. Poirot insisted that everyone remain in the house. There was no accusation yet. only a polite request delivered with such quiet authority that no one thought to refuse. Inspector Rowley observed from the corner, arms crossed, increasingly uneasy as Poirot arranged the chairs in the drawing-room. "We shall talk," Poirot said pleasantly, "because people reveal so much when they believe they are only talking." Mrs. Dale sat stiffly on the edge of her chair, hands folded tight. Lucy Finch perched beside the window, eyes fixed on the dark garden beyond. Arthur Bell stood near the door, trying unsuccessfully to appear relaxed. Poirot began with Mrs. Dale. He asked her to describe the morning again slowly. She spoke of rising early, of setting the kettle, of expecting Sir Reginald's bell. Her voice was steady, but Poirot noticed the slight emphasis she placed on certain words, as though reinforcing them even to herself. "And at what time did you last see Sir Reginald alive?" Poirot asked. "Last night, sir. Just after 9. I brought him his tea." "You are certain of the hour?" "Yes. The clock in the kitchen struck 9 as I left the tray." Poirot nodded. "And yet," he said gently, "the kitchen clock is 10 minutes fast. It always has been, has it not?" Mrs. Dale blinked. I suppose so. We are used to it." "So you saw him closer to 20 minutes past 9, Poirot said. "A small thing. But let us be exact." He turned to Lucy. "Mademoiselle, you say you did not pass the study this morning, but you went to the pantry, yes?" "Yes, sir. And the pantry door faces the study corridor." Lucy swallowed. "Yes, but I didn't look in." Poirot smiled faintly. "I did not ask if you looked in. I asked if you passed—" Her cheeks coloured. Then, "Yes. I passed it, and did you hear anything?" "No, sir. Not even the striking of a match." Lucy's eyes flickered. "No." Poirot let the silence stretch just long enough to make her shift uncomfortably, then turned to Arthur. "You, my friend, polished the study door last night. Did you notice the smell of smoke at any time?" Arthur frowned. "No, sir. I would have remembered. And this morning?" Arthur hesitated. "This morning I was in the yard. I didn't come inside until after." Poirot inclined his head. "Indeed. And yet your coat smells faintly of sulphur." Arthur flushed. "Matches, sir. I told you, yes," Poirot said calmly. "But sulphur clings when a match is struck indoors, where the air does not carry it away." Arthur opened his mouth, then closed it again. Poirot returned to Mrs. Dale. "Tell me, madame, Sir Reginald, did he trust you?" "I have served him 30 years, she said, a touch of pride breaking through her fear. "Then he would not mind if you entered his study at night?" She stiffened. "I would never." "Without reason," Poirot finished softly. "But perhaps there was a reason." Her gaze dropped. "He asked me to bring him his medicine late last night. That is all." "What medicine?" "For his heart." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "And where is it now? In the cabinet? Where it always is?" Poirot rose and crossed the room, opening the cabinet. Inside sat the small bottle, neatly arranged, unopened. He held it up. "This has not been touched in days." Mrs. Dale's breath caught. "He said he did not need it." Poirot replaced the bottle. "Perhaps, or perhaps he was prevented." He turned back to them all. "Each of you tells the truth, but not the whole truth. One of you heard something, one of you entered the study, and one of you knows why a match was burned, even though nothing was lit." Inspector Rowley shifted. "You still haven't said how the man was killed." Poirot smiled sadly. "Patience. First, motive." He looked at Lucy. "You were dismissed last week, were you not?" Her head snapped up. "He said he would reconsider." "And you, Arthur," Poirot continued. "You are deeply in debt." Arthur's shoulders sagged. "And you, Mrs. Dale," Poirot said quietly. "You stood to lose your home when Sir Reginald planned to sell the manor." Mrs. Dale's eyes filled with tears. "3 motives," Poirot said softly. "Fear, money, and desperation. But only one of you knew exactly how weak Sir Reginald's heart truly was." The room seemed to shrink around them. Somewhere the old clock chimed the hour, its sound echoing unnaturally loud. Poirot folded his hands. "Now," he said, "let us speak of the moment when one small flame changed everything." Poirot let the silence linger after his last words, allowing the weight of them to press upon each face in turn. The flickering lamplight caught beads of perspiration on Arthur Bell's brow, the tight line of Lucy Finch's mouth, the rigid dignity with which Mrs. Dale held herself together. Motive, Poirot knew, was never a straight road. It twisted, doubled back, and often concealed itself beneath very ordinary fears. "Let us be clear," Poirot said at last. Having a reason is not the same as committing the act. If it were so simple, the police would need no detectives. He began with Mrs. Dale, not unkindly. You gave Sir Reginald his tea at, let us say, 20 minutes past 9. You also brought his medicine later. That means you were alone with him twice. Yes, she said steadily, but I loved him. He was difficult, but he was my employer. My home. Just so, Poirot replied. And when you learned he planned to sell Ashcroft Manor? Her composure cracked. I begged him not to. I told him I had nowhere to go. He said arrangements would be made, but he was vague. He always was. Her voice hardened. But I did not kill him. Poirot nodded. No. You feared change, but fear alone does not explain the locked door, the match, the timing. Ned to Lucy. You were dismissed. A cruel blow, perhaps unjust. Lucy's eyes shone with anger. He accused me of stealing. I never did. He said my presence made him uneasy. And yet, Poirot said softly, you returned to the upper corridor this morning. She shook her head. Only to pass through. To listen? Poirot suggested. Her lips parted, then closed again. I heard nothing. Poirot accepted this without comment and moved on. Arthur Bell straightened as Poirot faced him. You needed money badly, Poirot said. Gambling debts. A man in trouble may think desperate thoughts. Arthur's voice was hoarse. I never went near him this morning, I swear it, and yet you owned the matches, Poirot said, and you were in the yard where no one could see you. Arthur's jaw tightened. So was half the village. Poirot smiled faintly. Yes, alibis are such fragile things. He paced slowly, arranging the pieces in his mind. No single motive accounted for all the details. Mrs. Dale had access but lacked the cunning. Lucy had resentment but no knowledge. Arthur had opportunity and means but not the subtlety Poirot sensed behind the crime. Inspector, Poirot said, turning briefly to Rowley, tell me, who stands to gain the most from Sir Reginald's death being declared natural? Rowley frowned. No one really. The estate goes to his daughter. Ah, yes, Poirot murmured. The daughter who has not been mentioned once today. The room stirred. Mrs. Dale looked up sharply. She was expected, Poirot continued. A letter arrived 3 days ago, did it not? Asking Sir Reginald to meet her privately. Mrs. Dale hesitated. Yes. He was unsettled afterward. And did you see this letter? No. He burned it. Poirot's eyes glinted. Burned it, with a match, perhaps. He moved back toward the study door, as though drawn by an invisible thread. Sir Reginald's heart was weak. Strong emotii. On could kill him. Fear, shock, anticipation. He stopped and turned. What if the crime required no poison, no weapon? Only timing and knowledge? Lucy shifted uneasily. What do you mean? I mean, Poirot said gently, that someone arranged for Sir Reginald to expect something terrifying at a precise moment. The locked door ensured privacy. The match provided heat, just enough, to activate something small. A smell, perhaps, one that meant something only to him. Mrs. Dale gasped softly. The study. He once had a gas heater installed. Years ago it leaked. He nearly died. Poirot inclined his head. Exactly. A memory. A terror. Rowley stared. You're saying someone made him think the gas was leaking again. A single heated capsule, Poirot said, releasing a trace odour. Enough to convince a frightened heart that danger had returned. Arthur whispered. But who would know that? Poirot's gaze rested on Mrs. Dale. Someone who was there when it happened. Someone who nursed him through the recovery. Mrs. Dale trembled. I would never. I do not say you did, Poirot replied softly. But you spoke of medicine last night, of fear this morning, and you alone knew how that fear could be awakened. The room was silent now, the web tightening though not yet closed. Poirot folded his hands, his expression grave. The motives tangle, he said quietly, but the method begins to speak, and when method and motive finally meet, the truth will have nowhere left to hide. The following morning dawned grey and drizzling, the manor wrapped in the same sombre mood that had haunted it since Sir Reginald's death. Inspector Rowley was brisk, full of certainty, convinced that the case had already found its conclusion. He had spent hours going over statements, checking alibis, and now he was poised to announce the results. There was a file on the desk, neatly typed, and Rowley gestured toe. Ardent with triumph. All the pieces fit, he said proudly. "The matchstick, the movements of the servants, the timing. It points clearly to Arthur Bell, young, desperate, a man in debt. He had access, he had opportunity. This morning he admitted owning matches and being in the yard. It's enough. The case is closed." Arthur's face paled, and he glanced around the room. Mrs. Dale's lips pressed into a tight line. Lucy's eyes widened, though she said nothing. Poirot, however, did not move, did not frown, did not even appear disturbed. He merely regarded Rowley with the faintest of smiles, as though enjoying a private joke. "Mon ami," Poirot said softly, "you are indeed satisfied." "But satisfaction, as I have learned, is not proof." Rowley bristled. "We have witnesses, confessions of sorts, motives, opportunity. What more could you want?" Poirot moved to the fireplace and crouched slightly, examining the charred matchstick once again. He held it lightly between two fingers, as though feeling for a pulse. "Ah, yes," he murmured, "a very telling item, is it not? One match burned and discarded, dangerous to life and yet seemingly innocuous. A small clue, yes, but clues often lie." He stood and walked toward Arthur. "Tell me, Jeune Homme, where were you exactly at 7 this morning?" "I was in the yard, sir," Arthur replied, "doing chores, I swear." Poirot's eyes did not leave his face. "All right. And yet, Inspector, he admits no more. The house smelled of nothing unusual. The study was locked. The matchstick burned in solitude. If we declare this sufficient, we declare the story closed before it is complete." Rowley frowned. "So what are you saying? That this matchstick is lying? That Arthur had nothing to do with it?" Poirot shook his head slowly. "Not that he had nothing to do, but that this is not the crime's full expression. You see, Rowley, the murderer is not always the one with the most obvious need. Sometimes the murderer is the one who waits for the proper moment, watching from the shadows, confident that others will rush to judgment." Mrs. Dale shifted nervously. "You think someone else is still here?" "I think," Poirot said, "that the person who understood Sir Reginald's fears, who knew precisely the effect of a gas leak's memory upon a fragile heart, and who could place a match to evoke terror without a trace, this person is cleverer than any immediate suspicion allows." Rowley ran his hand through his hair. "So you're saying all of this? Arthur's debt, Lucy's dismissal, Mrs. Dale's fear. None of it matters." Poirot smiled faintly. "They matter, Inspector. They are threads. But a tapestry is not revealed by threads alone. Observe, one small thing, overlooked by all, the clock glass is cracked outward. Why? Because the internal mechanism was touched, not by accident, but deliberately. And yet no one noticed anything wrong with the time itself. How curious!" He turned back to the group, voice gentle but firm. "You see, when a case seems solved, it often means someone wants you to believe it so. The mind is comfortable with simplicity, with clean endings. But the true culprit waits, not panicked, not hurried. They wait to see the investigators pat themselves on the back," Lucy whispered. "Then we can't trust anything? Not even Arthur's confession about the yard?" Poirot inclined his head. "Not entirely. A half-truth is a dangerous thing. It appears solid, yet conceals the real design." Rowley groaned. "So what now? We just wait for the next blow?" "Patience," Poirot said, settling into a chair as if the storm outside had nothing to do with him. "Patience and observation. For the criminal, confident in shadow, is patient indeed. And they will reveal themselves only when they believe the moment is theirs. Outside, the rain thick. Kenned, and the house seemed to hold its breath. Ashcroft Manor, once a place of simple routines and quiet dignity, had become a stage for careful deception. The authorities rushed to close the case, but Poirot knew that the real story was still unfolding, hidden in a dance of fear, knowledge, and quiet cruelty. One matchstick had only hinted at the truth, the rest waited in silence, a spectre of what was yet to come. Poirot spent the afternoon in quiet observation, moving slowly through Ashcroft Manor as though the house itself whispered secrets to him. He returned often to the study, kneeling by the fireplace and glancing at the matchstick, the cracked clock, the neat stacks of papers. Each element seemed to hum faintly, as if imbued with the memories of past actions. Then, almost absent-mindedly, he picked up a small leather-bound ledger, tucked at the back of a lower shelf, dust motes rising in tiny clouds as he opened it. The ledger was old, pages yellowed with age, detailing accounts from years before, debts, repayments, strange transfers. Poirot's sharp eyes scanned the names and sums, pausing at a particular entry, a payment to a law firm connected to a certain Mr. Wilfred Cairns, a solicitor who had once handled the estate of a man recently deceased under suspicious circumstances. The name struck him not only because of its rarity, but because it appeared repeatedly, alongside notes about Sir Reginald's own family, about disputes over inheritance and unsettled estates. He stood and walked to the drawing-room, where the three remaining figures, Mrs. Dale, Lucy, and Arthur, sat uneasily. Poirot placed the ledger on the table, opened to the relevant page. "Observe, mes amis," he said softly. "Our story is not as recent as one would believe. It stretches backward, intertwined with decisions made long before this week." Mrs. Dale leaned forward. "I don't understand, sir." Poirot's eyes flickered over each of them, reading both the faces and the silences. "You see, everyone here has ties, some hidden, some forgotten. Lucy, you were dismissed, yes, but not merely for a petty accusation. Your family, as I have learned, once served the Harringtons. A grievance was passed down, whispered in hushed tones, ignored yet never forgotten." Lucy's fingers clenched into her lap. That's not true," she stammered. Poirot inclined his head gently. "Ah, but truth often hides in layers, does it not? And, Arthur, you think only of your debts. Yet your father, too, had dealings with Sir Reginald. Unsuccessful ventures that left your family struggling. You feel entitled to redress, though you would not admit it. And Mrs. Dale, you served faithfully for decades. You trusted in the continuity of the house, yet the arrival of that distant letter, of plans for the daughter's inheritance, has disturbed everything you once held secure." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "All of you are connected, in ways subtle yet precise. The crime that appears new, immediate, is in truth rooted in these old grievances, these buried interactions." Rowley, impatient, leaned forward. "So what are you saying, Poirot? That old family grudges and debts caused this?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Not caused, Inspector. Provided the atmosphere. The opportunity came from the present, Sir Reginald's weakened heart, the locked study, the clever use of a match to activate fear. But the shadows of the past shaped who could act, and how they might understand the consequences of their act." He walked to the window, glancing at the darkened garden. "A man's heart is fragile in more ways than one. Physical frailty is only half the story. Emotional memory can strike with sudden force. Fear, resentment, anxiety, all of these have power over a susceptible mind. And Sir Reginald. He had experienced such moments before. Many of you knew them, perhaps without realizing how deeply they had been etched." Poirot turned sharply, eyes alight with intensity. The method chosen, subtle, invisible, almost innocent, could only succeed because of prior knowledge. Someone here, or perhaps someone connected through old arrangements, knew exactly how to evoke fear. And you see, Inspector, that is why the seemingly obvious suspect is not the one to hold entirely accountable. The past has cast its shadow over the present, and it is only by untangling it that we can glimpse the truth." Mrs. Dale whispered, "You mean, it's not just about today?" "Exactly," Poirot said, folding his hands. "The crime is a culmination, the visible tip of an iceberg formed over decades. Each grievance, each slight, each act of loyalty or betrayal contributes to the shape of what we see now. To solve it, we must consider not only who was present, but who understood the delicate interweaving of past and present." A distant chime of the manor clock punctuated his words, echoing through the empty corridors. Poirot glanced back at the group, his gaze calm yet piercing. "The web is larger than you imagine. The past has made this possible, and it is in those shadows, hidden yet ever present, that the final piece awaits." The house seemed to grow quieter still, as though it too were listening, and Poirot, standing amid the faint glow of lamplight and the whispers of old secrets, knew the next steps would require not just observation, but memory, both his own and that of those who had long believed the past could safely be forgotten. Poirot spent the next hour quietly arranging his thoughts in the study, tracing invisible lines between past grievances and present motives. Then he turned to a method he had long found effective when words alone failed, a test of character, subtle and almost imperceptible, designed to reveal the cracks that even the most careful liar could not conceal. He returned to the drawing-room where Mrs. Dale, Lucy, and Arthur waited, each sitting stiffly, eyes flicking toward the doorway as if he might vanish again without warning. Poirot placed the charred matchstick on the table, next to the ledger and the small bottle of medicine. He did not touch them further, but their presence was deliberate. Anchors to the mind, reminders of small but significant details. "Mes amis," he began, his voice gentle, almost conversational. "We have spoken of past grievances, of hidden motives. But now let us speak of honesty and memory." He paused, scanning their faces. "I am not interested in your words. I am interested in your reactions." Mrs. Dale shifted slightly, a faint tremor in her hands. Lucy's fingers tightened around the edge of the chair, while Arthur straightened, forcing a composure that seemed almost too rigid. Poirot smiled faintly, as though acknowledging a secret they had yet to confess to themselves. "I will read aloud a few passages from the ledger and the letters that came recently to Ashcroft Manor," he continued. "I ask only that you respond naturally. No preparation, no reflection, just instinct." He began, naming sums, dates, and correspondences that on the surface appeared innocuous. Arthur's hands twitched when Poirot mentioned a payment made by a distant relative of Sir Reginald's, a small sum that had never been fully explained. Lucy's breath caught when Poirot referred to a note she had seen in passing, meant to summon Sir Reginald's attention. Mrs. Dale, however, betrayed nothing at first, her expression carefully neutral, though Poirot's keen eye caught the slight narrowing of her lips when the ledger referenced an old estate matter she had handled decades ago. Poirot paused and leaned forward, hands resting lightly on the table. "Now," he said softly, "imagine, if you will, that Sir Reginald's death had not been from natural causes. Imagine that someone had wished to frighten him, to awaken memories of old, carefully buried fears. Who in this room would know precisely what to do? Who would know that a match, a small trace of heat, could cause a man's heart to falter?" A long silence followed. Mrs. Dale's composure began to waver. Her gaze flickered to the matchstick, then to the clock on the mantel. She swallowed, and her hands, which had been folded tightly in her lap, uncurled slightly, trembling. Lucy looked down at her hands, her jaw tight. Arthur's face, however, betrayed almost nothing, until Poirot, with a faint, imperceptible gesture, mentioned the exact moment Sir Reginald had last touched the medicine he was supposed to take. At that, Arthur's eyes flickered toward the bottle. He hesitated, a flash of recognition passing across his features, quickly masked by a forced smile. It was just enough. Poirot noted it, storing the reaction as one might collect a rare gem, a small hesitation, almost imperceptible, yet telling more than any direct confession. "Ah," Poirot murmured, more to himself than to anyone else. "Sometimes the soul betrays itself before the lips have spoken." He rose, placing his hands behind his back and pacing slowly. "Observe, Inspector, when faced with the invisible, the intangible, the implication that knowledge alone can destroy a man, one reveals more than they intend. A slip of the hand, a tightening of the throat, a momentary hesitation, that is where truth lies." Mrs. Dale's fingers fidgeted with the hem of her apron. Lucy's eyes darted toward the door, calculating, tense. Arthur's gaze fell to the floor, then back to the matchstick, and he exhaled slowly as though releasing a burden. Poirot stopped and faced them fully. "This is why, mes amis, one must never be satisfied with the obvious, nor with the apparent confession of motive. The true culprit reveals themselves not by what they claim to have done, but by what they cannot conceal. Instinct, reflex, the subtle betraying of knowledge they think hidden." Inspector Rowley watched, exasperated and fascinated at once, as Poirot's experiment unfolded without a word of accusation. A crack had appeared in the careful facade, a fissure in the deception, almost invisible to ordinary eyes. And yet Poirot's eyes glimmered with certainty. Somewhere in that imperceptible movement, in that quiet hesitation, lay the next key to unraveling the tangled web of fear, knowledge, and past grievances that had finally led to Sir Reginald's death. Poirot leaned back, hands folded. "We are close, Inspector, very close. And the next observation, the next test, will bring the shadow from which our culprit hides into the light." The late afternoon sun filtered through the tall windows of Ashcroft Manor, casting long, trembling shadows across the drawing-room. Poirot had just concluded his subtle exercise, noting the minute cracks in each suspect's composure, when a sharp commotion from the study drew them all to their feet. Inspector Rowley rushed ahead, flanked by Arthur, Lucy, and Mrs. Dale. Poirot followed at a measured pace, his expression calm, though the slightest crease between his brows betrayed a growing unease. The study door stood ajar. The room appeared unchanged at first glance, yet something vital had shifted. The ledger, the matchstick, and the bottle of medicine, all the carefully preserved items Poirot had used to draw reactions, were gone. In their place lay a thin layer of dust, disturbed only slightly, as though someone had brushed past in haste. Rowley ran to the desk. "Impossible!" he shouted. "I just saw them here this morning." Poirot crouched, examining the empty shelf where the ledger had rested. "Ah, mon ami," he murmured softly. "This is no accident. Someone has removed evidence deliberately. Someone who does not wish the past or the present to be revealed." Lucy's hand flew to her mouth. "But who could—" Poirot did not answer immediately. Instead, he walked slowly to the fireplace, tapping the brick lightly with his cane. The charred matchstick had vanished as well. "Notice," he said, voice low and deliberate, "the evidence that gave us insight, burned, removed, hidden. Why? Because the one who fears exposure knows the danger of the truth being recognized before it is fully concealed." Mrs. Dale shivered, clutching her apron. "You mean someone in this house?" "Very possibly," Poirot said. "Or someone with access who knows our procedures. Observe the neatness of the removal, no force used, no signs of panic. This is the act of someone who wishes to delay discovery, not one who acts recklessly." Rowley's frustration boiled over. "So we are back to square one. First we had motives, reactions, subtle tells, and now the proof itself disappears? How are we to proceed?" Poirot smiled faintly, almost kindly. "We proceed by remembering that nothing is ever truly gone. A disappearance leaves traces, whispers, tiny clues that survive even the most careful hands. The person who removed these items left a signature, not in what is absent, but in what is altered around it." He crouched by the desk, examining the surface where the ledger had rested. A faint scratch, almost imperceptible, marred the polished wood. It trailed toward the back of the desk, where a small, shallow drawer remained locked. Poirot straightened, a gleam in his eyes. "Ah, mon Dieu! This drawer has been secured recently, yet the key was never used in the course of our inspection. Someone wanted this container hidden, while appearing undisturbed. Someone who hopes to mislead and intimidate in equal measure." Arthur shifted nervously. I didn't touch anything," he stammered. "Indeed," Poirot said, looking at him calmly. "And yet every movement in the room has left its mark. The hand that took the ledger did not think to polish away the trace on the desk, did not consider the subtle scratch that will guide an observant eye." Lucy's voice trembled. "But what do we do now? Without the evidence, the case—" "It feels impossible." Poirot shook his head, folding his hands. "Impossible is not a word for those who observe carefully, who think like the criminal yet with justice in mind. The theft itself reveals more than the ledger could have. We now know someone is watching, waiting, confident that our attention can be diverted." Mrs. Dale's fingers twisted together. "You mean the culprit is still here, in the house?" "Yes," Poirot said softly. "And by removing the evidence, they hope to make us doubt, to frighten, to disrupt our investigation. But fear is a poor ally. Observation, patience, and understanding of human nature will reveal the truth. Whoever seeks to bury it will only delay the inevitable." Rowley groaned. "So we have a thief, a manipulator, and a murderer all in one, and they're playing us like pawns." Poirot inclined his head. "Exactly. And notice this, Inspector. The thief is not always the murderer. But the murderer often knows the thief intimately. The collusion may be intentional or subconscious, but the pattern left behind, small scratches, the precise timing, the items chosen, is a voice. We must listen carefully, for the next movement of the culprit will tell us even more than what has already been lost." The house seemed to hold its breath, the shadows lengthening, as if the walls themselves were aware of the hidden observer. Poirot straightened, eyes glinting. "Prepare yourself, Inspector. The game has changed, but it has not ended, and the next revelation may come not from words, but from the silent footprints left behind by a hand that believes it can outwit justice itself. The evening deepened into an oppressive, mist-laden darkness, the manor's corridors echoing faintly with the distant drip of water from the gutters. Poirot had retired to the study to consider the implications of the vanishing evidence, his sharp mind tracing possibilities and contingencies, when a sudden, piercing scream tore through the house. He was on his feet in an instant, cane in hand, moving swiftly yet silently. Inspector Rowley was not far behind, his coat flapping, boots clattering on the polished floor. They converged in the gallery outside the west wing, where the sound had originated, and found Lucy Finch collapsed against the wall, eyes wide with terror, trembling violently. It's Arthur," she gasped, clutching Poirot's arm for support. He's gone. And the study, the door, it's open, and... Poirot's gaze darted past her, toward the study at the end of the hall. The door stood slightly ajar, the lock intact but the handle smeared with a faint sticky substance. He signalled Rowley to approach cautiously, then stepped forward himself. Inside, the room was in disarray. Papers scattered, a chair overturned, and the faint odour of something acrid lingering in the air. But what seized his attention immediately was the empty space where Arthur Bell had been moments before. No sign of a struggle beyond the minor disarray, no blood, nothing to suggest forced removal, simply absence. "Remarkable," Poirot murmured, almost to himself. "A disappearance perfectly timed, executed with minimal trace. Observe, Inspector, the hand of someone skilled, someone who understands the panic of discovery yet knows exactly how to remain unseen." Rowley rubbed his forehead. "Another attack? A trap? What is going on here, Poirot? First the stolen Evid. Now Arthur vanishes? This is insane." Poirot crouched by the desk, examining a faint smear of dust near the fireplace. "Notice the pattern, Inspector. The person who took the evidence knew our methods, anticipated our scrutiny, and now the one they consider a potential threat, Arthur, is removed before he can speak. This is deliberate. A warning—" Lucy whimpered, gripping Poirot's arm tighter. "He didn't even leave a note. Nothing. I just came to the gallery and—" Poirot's hand rested briefly on hers, his voice calm, yet tinged with intensity. "Fear can mislead the mind, mademoiselle. Observe what remains, not what is absent. The way the papers are scattered, the position of the chair, the faint trace along the floor, they are the language of the culprit." Rowley, frustrated and anxious, shouted, "Then how do we stop them? How do we find him before it's too late?" Poirot's gaze swept the room, sharp and calculating. "We anticipate, mon ami. We anticipate not as those who act in panic, but as those who think like the one who strikes from the shadows. Our next steps must be methodical. Each corridor, each doorway, each hidden alcove must be considered. Whoever has orchestrated this second act is clever, yes, but even cleverness has limitations." Lucy's voice trembled again. "Do you think they'll come for us next?" Poirot nodded slowly. "They may well try. That is why we must move, but with caution. Observe, do not rush. The criminal believes themselves several steps ahead, but even the most calculated mind can be misled by one who understands the subtleties of human nature." He moved to the window, glancing out over the fog-shrouded gardens. A figure, indistinct in the swirling mist, seemed to pause just beyond the iron gates, almost as though testing the manor, gauging the reactions within. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "See, Inspector," he said, turning. She sharply. "The villain is still at liberty. The vanishing of Arthur is both threat and opportunity. Our challenge has changed. We must now prevent another tragedy, anticipate the next move, and do so without alerting them to our awareness. The game is no longer merely one of observation. It is a battle of wits, a duel conducted in shadows." Rowley's hands shook as he grasped Poirot's shoulder. "And if we fail—" Poirot's expression softened only slightly, a glint of steel behind his calm demeanour. "Failure is not an option. Not while I still breathe. The past and present converge here, Inspector, but the future is what we must protect, and for that we must think, anticipate and act before the shadows strike again." A sudden creak from the corridor made them both tense. Poirot's eyes, sharp as ever, flicked toward the sound. The manor, silent yet alive, seemed to hold its breath. Somewhere, beyond the walls, the culprit waited, confident, patient, and still unseen, while the hunt for truth, and now safety, had begun in earnest. The night deepened, the fog pressing against the windows of Ashcroft Manor like a living thing. Poirot sat in the study, cane resting against his knee, eyes narrowed in thought. Inspector Rowley paced behind him, restless and muttering under his breath. The disappearance of Arthur had rattled the household, yet Poirot remained calm, as though the storm outside mirrored only the tension of those who had failed to see the invisible threads connecting the events. Poirot's gaze returned once more to the small details of the room. The faint scratch on the desk, the slightly skewed placement of the mantel clock, the smudge of dust along the edge of the fireplace. They were trivial to an unobservant eye, but to Poirot they were the subtle language of human behavior. His mind, ever methodical, began to trace a sequence, to look not at what had been done in isolation, but at how each act was connected. Then, as he absently adjusted the ledger's empty shelf, a memory flickered. During the initial questioning, Lucy had insisted she did not pass the study, a statement that at the time had seemed merely defensive. But the phrasing had been peculiar, carefully chosen. She had not said, "I did not enter the study," or "I stayed away from the study," but "I did not pass the study." A deliberate emphasis, perhaps, meant to deceive herself as much as others. Poirot's eyes glinted. "Ah, yes, and the matchstick," he murmured under his breath. The small, burned match, the first clue that had seemed so inconsequential, was not simply a tool but a signal. It was placed in such a way that anyone entering the room would see it immediately, yet it revealed only to one who knew what to look for. It was a breadcrumb, left for the observant mind, or perhaps for the person with knowledge of Sir Reginald's habits. He rose and began pacing slowly. Each movement of his foot disturbed a thin layer of dust along the floorboards, echoing softly. "Patience, mon ami," he whispered. "Patience and observation will uncover what is hidden in plain sight." Then it struck him. The pattern, the incidents of the day were not random. The stolen evidence, Arthur's disappearance, the subtle reactions to his psychological test, they were all orchestrated to mislead, to direct attention toward the obvious suspects while concealing a more intricate truth. But what connected them all? It was the meticulous timing, the use of small, almost invisible signals, and the exploitation of fear rooted in past experience. Poirot moved to the mantel, fingers lightly tracing the clock's frame, the cracked glass, the uneven burn of the matchstick, the slight skew of the ledger. They were all indicators not of carelessness but of intention, the hand at a range. These details was methodical, familiar with human tendencies, yet audacious in its subtlety. And the key, Poirot realized, had been glimpsed in a seemingly trivial remark, Mrs. Dale's observation that Sir Reginald had feared the gas heater in the study, an old fear nearly forgotten by all except her. "Of course," Poirot murmured, voice low but fervent. The match, the timing, the locked door, it was all designed to trigger that memory, to exploit a known fear. The method and the motive intersect here, in a single, almost invisible line. He returned to the drawing-room, eyes bright, cane tapping lightly against the floor. The household had gathered once more, each person tense, waiting for guidance. Poirot's gaze swept across them, noting the slight unease in Lucy's posture, the subtle twitch of Arthur's hand, the rigidity of Mrs. Dale's shoulders. "Mes amis," he began, voice calm yet commanding, "we have been distracted by the apparent chaos. But observe the connecting thread. Every act, every disappearance, every carefully placed object is not random. There is a rhythm, a pattern. The criminal has relied on distraction, assuming the smallest details would be overlooked." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Yet the pattern reveals itself to those who watch, those who remember, those who do not merely react but think. The key has been before our eyes all along, misplaced, seemingly trivial, yet decisive. The moment one recognizes the method behind the madness, one also recognizes the hand that guides it. Rowley leaned forward, breathless. "You mean the whole thing has been staged to mislead us, right under our noses?" "Precisely," Poirot said, smiling faintly, a cunning hand playing with perception and fear. But patterns, mon ami, are relentless. They cannot remain hidden forever. And now, with this understanding, we may finally anticipate the next movement, the next signal, and bring the shadow into the light. As the manor settled around them, the fog pressing ever closer, Poirot's mind raced, not with panic, but with clarity. The pattern had emerged, and with it, the path to the truth became visible, illuminated by the smallest details that everyone else had ignored. The game had shifted, but the detective's vision had sharpened, ready to confront the darkness waiting to strike once more. The night deepened, the fog pressing against the windows of Ashcroft Manor like a living thing. Poirot sat in the study, cane resting against his knee, eyes narrowed in thought. Inspector Rowley paced behind him, restless and muttering under his breath. The disappearance of Arthur had rattled the household, yet Poirot remained calm, as though the storm outside mirrored only the tension of those who had failed to see the invisible threads connecting the events. Poirot's gaze returned once more to the small details of the room, the faint scratch on the desk, the slightly skewed placement of the mantel clock, the smudge of dust along the edge of the fireplace. They were trivial to an unobservant eye, but to Poirot they were the subtle language of human behavior. His mind, ever methodical, began to trace a sequence, to look not at what had been done in isolation, but at how each act was connected. Then, as he absently adjusted the ledger's empty shelf, a memory flickered. During the initial questioning, Lucy had insisted she did not pass the study, a statement that, at the time, had seemed merely defensive. But the phrasing had been peculiar, carefully chosen. She had not said, "I did not enter the study," or "I stayed away from the study, but I did not pass the study." A deliberate emphasis, perhaps, meant to deceive herself as much as others. Poirot's eyes glinted. "Ah, yes, and the matchstick," he murmured under his breath. The small burned match, the first clue that had seemed so inconsequential, was not simply a tool but a signal. It was placed in such a way that anyone entering the room would see it immediately, yet it revealed only to one who knew what to look for. It was a breadcrumb, left for the observant mind, or perhaps for the person with knowledge of Sir Reginald's habits. He rose and began pacing slowly. Each movement of his foot disturbed a thin layer of dust along the floorboards, echoing softly. "Patience, mon ami," he whispered. "Patience and observation will uncover what is hidden in plain sight." Then it struck him. The pattern. The incidents of the day were not random. The stolen evidence, Arthur's disappearance, the subtle reactions to his psychological test. They were all orchestrated to mislead, to direct attention toward the obvious suspects while concealing a more intricate truth. But what connected them all? It was the meticulous timing, the use of small, almost invisible signals, and the exploitation of fear rooted in past experience. Poirot moved to the mantel, fingers lightly tracing the clock's frame. The cracked glass, the uneven burn of the matchstick, the slight skew of the ledger, they were all indicators not of carelessness, but of intention. The hand that arranged these details was methodical, familiar with human tendencies, yet audacious in its subtlety, and the key, Poirot realized, had been glimpsed in a seemingly trivial remark, Mrs. Dale's observation that Sir Reginald had feared the gas heater in the study, an old fear nearly forgotten by all except her. "Of course," Poirot murmured, voice low but fervent. The match, the timing, the locked door, it was all designed to trigger that memory, to exploit a known fear. The method and the motive intersect here, in a single, almost invisible line. He returned to the drawing-room, eyes bright, cane tapping L, idly against the floor. The household had gathered once more, each person tense, waiting for guidance. Poirot's gaze swept across them, noting the slight unease in Lucy's posture, the subtle twitch of Arthur's hand, the rigidity of Mrs. Dale's shoulders. "Mes amis," he began, voice calm yet commanding, "we have been distracted by the apparent chaos. But observe the connecting thread. Every act, every disappearance, every carefully placed object is not random. There is a rhythm, a pattern. The criminal has relied on distraction, assuming the smallest details would be overlooked." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Yet the pattern reveals itself to those who watch, those who remember, those who do not merely react but think. The key has been before our eyes all along, misplaced, seemingly trivial, yet decisive. The moment one recognizes the method behind the madness, one also recognizes the hand that guides it. Rowley leaned forward, breathless. "You mean, the whole thing has been staged to mislead us, right under our noses?" "Precisely," Poirot said, smiling faintly. "A cunning hand playing with perception and fear. But patterns, mon ami, are relentless. They cannot remain hidden forever. And now, with this understanding, we may finally anticipate the next movement, the next signal, and bring the shadow into the light." As the manor settled around them, the fog pressing ever closer, Poirot's mind raced, not with panic, but with clarity. The pattern had emerged, and with it, the path to the truth became visible, illuminated by the smallest details that everyone else had ignored. The game had shifted, but the detective's vision had sharpened, ready to confront the darkness waiting to strike once more. The house was cloaked in a suffocating stillness that evening, the fog pressing against the windows like a curtain of uncertainty. Poirot had spent hours planning, arranging, and anticipating. Every corridor, every shadow, every subtle noise had been accounted for. The trap he intended to set was not one of force, but of psychology, a confrontation so precise that the guilty mind could not resist revealing itself. He gathered the remaining household members in the drawing-room under the pretense of recounting the progress of the investigation. Rowley stood near the doorway, tense but obedient, while Lucy and Mrs. Dale took their seats, eyes wary, voices subdued. Poirot's gaze swept over them like a gentle but unyielding beam of light, sharp and observant. "Mes amis," Poirot began. "Calm and deliberate. We have traced the events of these past days with care. We have observed reactions, noted discrepancies, and even anticipated actions. And yet, the final piece, the one that links method, motive, and opportunity, remains unspoken. It is time for the truth to be illuminated." He reached for the ledger and the matchstick, both of which had been recovered through careful inquiry and observation. He laid them gently on the table, ensuring each suspect could see them. "Observe these," he said softly. "They are small, yes, almost insignificant, yet they hold the key to the sequence of events that has so perplexed us, and the person who orchestrated this knows that their meticulous planning is now exposed." Mrs. Dale's fingers twisted in her lap. Lucy's eyes darted nervously toward the windows. Arthur's jaw clenched, though he tried to appear indifferent. Poirot's gaze fixed on her, the one he had long suspected, the careful, calculating mind behind the orchestrated terror. "You see," Poirot continued, "the removal of evidence, the disappearance of Arthur, the use of fear rooted in the past, it was all designed to mislead, to create chaos, to test our responses. And yet the pattern has emerged. The method points to one who understood both the habits and the vulnerabilities of Sir Reginald, one who has lived in this house long enough to know every secret, every routine." He allowed a beat to pass, letting the silence draw a taut line through the room. "It is time, mes amis, for honesty, for the mind that thrives on control cannot resist a carefully constructed trap. And the trap, you will find, is your own reflection. The truth has been in front of you all along, but now it can be faced without ambiguity." A faint sound, almost imperceptible, came from the corner of the room. Poirot's eyes narrowed. The air shifted slightly. A movement by the window revealed a figure attempting stealthy retreat. In an instant, Poirot's voice, firm and precise, cut through the tension. "Stop, mon ami. Do not attempt escape. There is nowhere to hide and nowhere to deflect responsibility. The game has ended." The figure froze, then slowly turned. It was Mrs. Dale. Her composure cracked, her hands trembling. I didn't mean, I only wanted to—" Her voice faltered, unsteady. Poirot's expression remained calm, unyielding. But you see, it was your fascination with control, your careful orchestration, that led to this. You relied on fear, on precision, on the manipulation of others' perceptions. You believed that subtlety could shield you, that the mind's shadows would protect you. But every action leaves a trace, every calculation a mark. And here, mes amis, the final act cannot conceal the truth. Lucy gasped softly. "It was you, all along?" Mrs. Dale's eyes filled with tears, her shoulders slumping. I only wanted to prove—" I wanted to see how they would react, how Sir Reginald would—" Her words collapsed under the weight of her confession. Poirot inclined his head. "Yes, and your meticulous planning, your careful removal of evidence, your exploitation of fear, all revealed not only the method, but the mind. The desire to orchestrate events, to manipulate responses, was stronger than any concern for morality or consequence. And yet, as always, human nature provides openings. One cannot fully resist instinct, and your hand, though skilled, betrayed itself in subtle gestures, in patterns that only an observant mind could discern." Inspector Rowley stepped forward, relief and authority mingling in his voice. "You're under arrest, Mrs. Dale. You've confessed, and there is enough evidence now to ensure justice is done." Mrs. Dale sank into the nearest chair, exhausted, her carefully maintained facade shattered. Poirot, calm and composed, allowed himself a faint smile. The pieces were finally in place. The chaos of the past days had been orchestrated, the motives exposed, and the criminal revealed. Ashcroft Manor, once a stage for fear and manipulation, could now begin to reclaim its quiet dignity, at least for those who remained. Poirot's eyes swept the room one last time, noting the reactions of the survivors, the small tremors of relief and realization. Justice, he knew, was rarely immediate, yet when the mind of the criminal had been illuminated in full, the game was concluded, and in that clarity the shadows that had haunted the house were finally dispelled. The morning sun slanted through the tall windows of Ashcroft Manor, casting long golden stripes across the polished floors. The household, though visibly relieved, was quiet, still absorbing the events of the previous night. Mrs. Dale had been escorted to a separate room under guard, her confession recorded, and her motives laid bare. Lucy and Arthur sat together near the window, shoulders slightly slumped, trying to reconcile the terror and chaos with the fragile sense of safety now that the culprit was exposed. Poirot, however, moved with a measured calm, cane in hand, his mind far from settled. He paced the room, eyes scanning each surface, each shadow, each subtle indication that the room itself might betray a secret yet unseen. Something, he sensed, remained unresolved. Inspector Rowley, still flush with relief, clapped him on the shoulder. "Well, Poirot, I think it's safe to say the case is finally closed. The culprit confessed. We've got all we need." Poirot paused, turning slowly to the inspector, a faint smile on his lips but eyes sharper than ever. "Mon ami, one must never declare victory prematurely. Ah, the human mind is a subtle thing, capable of hiding not only motives but accomplices and sometimes even the truth itself." Just as he spoke, a quiet sound drew their attention, a soft, deliberate rustling from the study. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Ah, a final movement, perhaps." He gestured for Rowley to follow, moving toward the study with deliberate steps. The door, which had been locked since Mrs. Dale's confession, now stood slightly ajar. Inside, the room was immaculate, as if nothing had ever happened, but Poirot's gaze fell on a small envelope carefully placed on the desk. He picked it up, inspecting the seal. It bore no official markings, only a flourish of handwriting that he immediately recognized. Not Mrs. Dale's, not any of the household staff, but someone else entirely. With deliberate care, he broke the seal and unfolded the letter. The words inside made his eyes narrow further, a faint flicker of surprise hidden behind his composed expression. It was a confession, but not from Mrs. Dale. The handwriting was crisp, precise, familiar in a way that immediately recalled earlier observations. The letter revealed that while Mrs. Dale had orchestrated the acts of fear and manipulation, she had been guided, subtly instructed, and encouraged by another presence in the house, someone who had studied the household long before Sir Reginald's death, and who had nurtured Mrs. Dale's fascination with control. The mastermind was someone who had not acted directly, but had engineered the sequence of events from behind the scenes. Poirot's mind raced, reconstructing every detail. The subtle hints Mrs. Dale had left, the almost imperceptible nudges in conversation, the way certain items had been handled, the faint smile she had sometimes suppressed. Suddenly the real architect became clear. It was Lucy. He turned slowly, gaze meeting hers. She froze, a subtle blanch of recognition passing across her features. "It can't be," she whispered, though Poirot's eyes told her that words were no longer sufficient. "Yes, mademoiselle," he said softly. yet with undeniable authority. You observed carefully, guided, influenced, and allowed another to carry out the acts, believing that the control you desired would remain invisible. Yet every movement leaves a trace, every hesitation, every glance, every carefully planted suggestion forms a pattern. You underestimated the powers of observation. Rowley's face went pale. You're saying Lucy was the real mastermind? She manipulated Mrs. Dale? Poirot inclined his head. Precisely. The acts of fear, the disappearance of Arthur, the vanishing evidence, all orchestrated to mislead, to mask the mind that guided them. The confession of Mrs. Dale was genuine in the acts she committed, but she was not the originator. That, mon ami, was the hand of Lucy Finch. Lucy's composure crumbled, her voice breaking. I only wanted to see if it could be done. To understand, the control, the fear. I didn't mean for him to die. Ah, but intention and action are inseparable in consequence, Poirot said gently. The mind that engineers and manipulates is as responsible as the hand that strikes. You underestimated human perception, and thus revealed yourself. The final twist, the last piece of the pattern, always L. Ease where one believes it cannot be. Rowley stepped forward, incredulous yet resolute. You're under arrest, Miss Finch. The real mastermind has been unmasked. Poirot, calm and composed, allowed himself a faint smile. The case, finally, had revealed not only the crime, but the intricate mind behind it. The shadows had shifted one last time, and justice, in all its subtlety, had been restored. The corridors of Ashcroft Manor were quiet now, the oppressive tension of the past days replaced by a fragile, uneasy calm. Inspector Rowley had ensured that Lucy Finch was taken into custody, her hands bound not by physical strength alone, but by the inevitability of her exposure. Yet Poirot remained in the drawing-room, cane resting lightly against his knee, eyes sweeping the room with the meticulous scrutiny that had never failed him. He motioned for Rowley and the others to gather around. "Mes amis," he said softly, "we have arrived at the conclusion of our investigation. Yet it is important to reflect upon the subtle signs, the faint echoes of behavior, and the clues that most would have overlooked. In doing so, we see not only the crime, but the architecture of the mind behind it." Rowley, still reeling from the revelations, asked, "Are you certain there is no one else involved? No other hand behind this chaos?" Poirot shook his head slowly. "Ah, the mind of Lucy Finch is singular in its cleverness. She manipulated, guided, and observed with extraordinary subtlety. Yet every movement left an imprint, every choice of words, every placement of an object, every hesitation in her voice. She relied upon the fear, knowledge, and compliance of Mrs. Dale, but her own impulses, those small betrayals of instinct, revealed the truth." He moved to the mantel, gesturing toward the items that had once seemed trivial, the matchstick, the ledger, the faint scratch along the desk. "Consider Essay, mes amis." The matchstick was chosen not for its practical effect alone, but as a psychological lever, exploiting Sir Reginald's known anxieties. The ledger, removed and hidden, was intended to mislead, but in its displacement it left traces, faint, almost imperceptible, that indicated the timing and hand behind the manipulation. And the scratch on the desk, so delicate yet significant, revealed a sequence of handling, a rhythm of behavior that only an acute observer could discern. Lucy, seated under the watchful eye of the constable, remained silent, eyes lowered. Poirot continued, his voice calm yet compelling, detailing the threads she had overlooked or underestimated. "The human mind is capable of great cunning, yet it cannot fully suppress instinct. In your eagerness to observe and control, you left fingerprints upon the very fabric of perception. The hesitation when confronted, the subtle reactions to my test, the carefully worded statements, all formed a pattern. And it is that pattern, the invisible architecture of deception, that has allowed us to see the truth." Rowley nodded slowly, the weight of understanding settling over him. "So all the chaos, the theft, the disappearance, it was meant to misdirect us, to make it seem like a different person was responsible." "Exactly, mon ami," Poirot said. "The visible acts were mere puppetry, orchestrated by a mind that sought control, fascination, and observation. Mrs. Dale was the unwitting participant, and Arthur was a pawn to create tension. But Lucy, her intellect, her obsession with influence, was the true force behind the events. Justice, in this case, has been delivered not only through the confession, but by the recognition of her methods. Yet, as the constables prepared to leave with their prisoner, Poirot's expression softened, a faint shadow passing over his features. And yet, consider the mind of Lucy. Finch. Clever, calculated, cautious. It is entirely possible that even now, as she leaves these walls, she has plans, contingencies, and observations that may extend beyond our grasp. One must never believe that the cleverest among us is ever entirely contained. The sun had climbed higher, piercing the lingering morning mist outside Ashcroft Manor, casting long, trembling shadows across the manicured lawns. Poirot walked slowly down the gravel path, cane in hand, the weight of the past day's revelations pressing lightly against his composed demeanour. Behind him, the manor receded, its tall windows reflecting the golden light as though holding memories of the chaos that had transpired within. Inspector Rowley and the remaining household members watched from the doorway, their expressions a mixture of relief, exhaustion, and lingering unease. Poirot's mind, however, was not resting. Though the primary culprit had been identified, exposed, and justice set in motion, his keen intellect refused to let the case settle into neat closure. Small inconsistencies, minute irregularities, and subtle impressions lingered, like shadows clinging to the edges of a sunlit room. The faint discoloration along the floorboards in the west corridor, the almost imperceptible smudge on the study lock, and a cryptic note he had found tucked beneath the ledger, all of these whispered that the story was not entirely concluded. He paused near a wrought-iron gate, hands clasped behind his back, eyes sweeping the manor with careful precision. "Mon Dieu," he murmured softly, almost to himself, "the threads of deception are tangled even more deeply than they appear. One can apprehend the hand, yes, but the mind may yet remain a step ahead." Rowley approached, curiosity edged with lingering anxiety. "You mean there could be more to this, Poirot, after all that has happened?" Poirot's lips curved into the faintest of smiles, enigmatic as ever. "Ah, Inspector, the art of detection is never complete. Observe, the clever mind leaves behind subtle clues, hints, tiny anomalies that seem inconsequential until one sees the pattern. Even when the criminal is captured, even when confessions are made, the ripple of intelligence, the residue of ingenuity, may endure. A truly cunning mind, it never surrenders its secrets entirely." He reached down and retrieved a small scrap of paper that had been overlooked amid the disorder of the study. The ink was faint, almost invisible in the morning light, yet Poirot read it carefully. The message was cryptic. A single line carefully penned, "Not all shadows have been counted." His brow arched imperceptibly. Ah, a reminder, subtle, elegant. Perhaps left by the mind we captured, or perhaps by another who has watched quietly, waiting for their moment. One can never be too certain that all is revealed, that the story is truly finished. And that, mes amis, is what keeps the mind vigilant, alert, and ready for the next challenge. Lucy, standing quietly beside Rowley, glanced up. "Do you mean there might be another person involved?" Poirot's gaze lingered on her briefly, inscrutable yet piercing. "It is possible, mademoiselle. But more likely, it is the nature of cleverness itself that leaves one always a step ahead, even when one is seemingly caught. We have unravelled the major threads, yes, but the minor threads, the subtle echoes, these may hint at games yet to be played." He straightened, cane tapping lightly against the gravel, the sound steady and deliberate, echoing softly through the quiet morning. And that, my friends, is the eternal allure of the detective's work. Each case, each crime, each human mind holds layers, and even when justice seems served, there remain traces, whispers, and shadows of posse. Abilities. One must always watch, always consider, always anticipate. Rowley sighed, a mixture of awe and exasperation. "So we never really finish, do we?" Poirot inclined his head with gentle gravitas. "Never, Inspector. One may resolve the visible, the tangible, the confessed. But the mysteries, the subtle intricacies, the hidden designs, they continue, quietly, beyond our immediate vision. And it is in those unseen spaces, those faint traces, that the next puzzle waits." As the detective continued down the gravel path, the manor receding behind him, he paused to glance once more at the horizon. The sun glinted off the distant hills, and a soft wind carried the faint scent of autumn leaves. He allowed himself a small, satisfied smile, tempered by the certainty that the world would offer more mysteries, more puzzles, more minds to challenge and understand. And though the case of Ashcroft Manor was ostensibly concluded, the lingering question, the subtle, unsolved hints, the faint line of ink suggesting shadows yet uncounted, remained, ensuring that Poirot's mind, ever vigilant, was already turning toward the next enigma that awaited him in the world beyond. The game of observation and deduction, he knew, would never truly end. Rowley frowned. "Are you suggesting she might escape consequences in some way?" Poirot smiled faintly, a glimmer of his characteristic inscrutable calm. "She will face the law, yes. Yet the human mind, particularly one attuned to subtlety and manipulation, is capable of enduring and adapting. Justice may be served in the courts, but the ripple of her influence, the lessons she has learned from this orchestration, remain a reminder that even the most perfect resolution contains shadows. That is why the detective must always observe, anticipate, and think one step beyond the ordinary." He stood, leaning lightly on his cane, and gazed around the queue. "Yet, Manon. The case is resolved, mes amis, but the world is not devoid of cunning. The clues missed, the small signs ignored, all reinforce the necessity of vigilance. One observes not only with the eyes but with the mind, tracing the invisible lines, noting the subtle movements that escape ordinary attention. That is the art, the science, and the satisfaction of detection." The fog outside began to lift, light spilling into the manor as if affirming the resolution. And yet, as Poirot turned toward the remaining household members, the faintest shadow of unease lingered in the corners, a reminder that even when justice is delivered, the mind of a clever criminal may endure, and the echoes of deception may never be entirely silenced.